Welcome to Global Connections with Robert Siegel, presented by the American Friends of Rabin Medical Center. Our monthly Leaders Forum addresses vital issues facing society, the economy, real estate, medicine, technology, and science. My name is Dr. Joshua Plow. I am the Executive Director of American Friends of Rabin Medical Center, AFRMC, a 501c3 national American organization based in New York City. We at AFRMC represent Israel's premier hospital, Rabin Medical Center in Petah Tikva in Greater Tel Aviv, the leading institution named in honor of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. The hospital is a model of coexistence, as it serves 1 million patients annually from all ethnic and religious backgrounds with the same compassionate care. Please support our mission. Join our community of friends. Visit us, American Friends of Rabin Medical Center, online, afrmc.org, via our website and social media outlets, on Twitter and Instagram, LinkedIn and YouTube, and our Facebook page and discussion group. Our host and moderator for Global Connections is Robert Siegel, former host of All Things Considered on National Public Radio for 30 years. Over the course of an hour each month, Global Connections features guests who Robert Siegel interviews as they explore important issues in our world. Today's Global Connections topic is Challenges Facing Washington in 2021. Thank you to our very special guest today, former Senator Al Franken, comedian and host of the Al Franken Show, Dr. Norm Ornstein, author and resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, and Nina Totenberg, NPR Legal Affairs correspondent. And now, Global Connections with Robert Siegel.
Thank you, Josh. We've experienced many changes in 2020, changes in how we relate to friends and family, to our jobs, how we communicate, how we shop, how we exercise. We have been exposed this past year to undeniably stark disparities in how Americans of different races, regions, and economic status experience life in our complex society, including how vulnerable we are to police violence or to infectious disease, and how open we are to protective distancing or to vaccination. As 2020 draws to a close, the theme of abnormality just won't quit. We now have an abnormal transition from one president to another, with the legitimacy of the electoral process under assault and an uncertain political future awaiting us in Washington. That is the subject of this month's Global Connections, Challenges Facing Washington in the coming year. We have three terrific panelists. Our first guest is Al Franken, who made a very successful transition from comedy, above all Saturday Night Live, to politics. Now, he was elected twice to the U.S. Senate in 2008 and 2014, a Democrat from Minnesota. He was forced to resign in 2018, but he has remained an insightful and interesting progressive Democratic voice in Washington, D.C., hosting the Al Franken podcast. I would just like to say here in a year when we've been talking about close elections and recounts that Al Franken's 2008 defeat of the incumbent Republican Senator Norm Coleman ranks as one of the all-time nail-biters. The recounts and litigation of that election kept Franken from assuming his seat until, I think it was July of 2009. Al Franken, welcome, and thanks for joining us.
It was July, yes. I actually won the recount in January. I could have been seated with my colleagues, but the Republicans really didn't want me to get seated. I ended up being the 60th vote.
Yep.
And so they managed to be able to stop it till July.
So you've been having some sense of deja vu this year in some of the recounts?
Well, you mean in terms of Republicans acting in bad ways? It's a constant deja vu, I think, for a lot of Americans.
In 2008, as you said, when the Democrats were waiting on your win in Minnesota, the question was, would they have 60? Would they have a veto-proof 60 seats out of 100 in the Senate? We're now looking ahead to runoffs in Georgia. And if the Democrats defied the odds and won 2 seats that are up on January 5th, they would have 50 seats plus the vice president makes for a majority. I just wonder if you could explain to someone who hasn't worked in or around the Senate, how big is the difference between having the seat that gives you the majority by 1 or being 1 short of having the majority?
Well, it's all the difference because the majority leader controls the agenda on the floor. So you can't even offer legislation unless you're in the majority in reality. And so this is huge, of course, this runoff, these 2 runoff elections. And usually Democrats don't win these, but usually it's a large part because we lose a lot of voters between November and January who really aren't aware that the runoff is happening. And in this case, everyone's aware. There's been so much money poured into Georgia on both sides for TV ads that people are sick of them. This is a battleground state. They were sick of them in November. But I've been investing my political action committee in the ground game. We've been giving to Unite Here. And right now, the race is there's no persuasion going on. It's all turnout.
Turnout. Let's assume we know the biggest question of all, we don't know the answer to which party will have the majority in the Senate. Although
this is what's at stake,
mm-hmm.
and it's enormous, and that's why this is so important. I mean, this is so important, and I've had a number of big donors who I've been asking to give to Unite Here, which is one of the ground operations, and they were going like, "Oh, you know what? I gave so much money during the thing, and I'm just exhausted." And I go like, "This is the finish line. Don't stop an inch before the finish line." And the stakes here, we know what the stakes are, and it's the Senate.
Joe Biden has stressed the need to respect the motives of his political adversaries. They question their motives and you can't compromise, he says. Do you think that the GOP Senate leadership is in enough of a mood for compromise to permit something to happen, whether they're in the majority by 1 or in the minority by the other, some legislation on something big, immigration, infrastructure, criminal justice?
Well, maybe infrastructure. There's certain areas where I think there is, agreement that we need. In fact, Trump ran on a huge $1 trillion infrastructure project and we never got it. But I'm sure that we need to put people back to work. The first thing we need to do is address COVID.
Yeah.
And we also need to do a COVID package. So many Americans are hungry. We've seen food insecurity triple. What's happened is disgraceful, and I do blame largely the Republicans. The House had passed a bill in June, and we haven't seen any kind of relief for the people, and people are about to lose their assistance.
Al, what does that say about the outlook for any significant legislation being passed after January? I mean, if it's been this hard before we see the effects of vaccination, what's the chance of seeing aid coming out after that?
Well, it depends what happens before.
Yeah.
My feeling is they're going to do something before, because people are about to lose their support and unemployment, additional support for unemployment. So I would think that something is going to happen. It's going to be woefully inadequate. And this is, again, why this election in Georgia is so important. Mitch McConnell, after Obama won, basically told his caucus that we're going to do everything to make this guy a one-term president. And there's no question that that's what he'll do again. And if we don't have the majority, we will not get any judges, or practically no judges. I mean, we may get one of the more moderate Republicans to cross over for someone, for a few judges, but this is going to be a really, really if we don't take the majority.
There have to be cabinet secretaries. I mean, what's going to happen to the confirmation process if the Democrats don't have the majority?
I think that the Republicans will be in charge of that, but I do think that there are the kinds of choices that Biden has made are people who are very experienced, very well known to people in Washington, and have tremendous credentials. So I think by and large, he will get his choices. By and large, do you assume that we'll have some controversial votes blocking nominations? Yeah, they'll Becerra, for HHS. It might be. He's been critical of Republicans while he was in the House. There are any number of. There are a few that I'm sure are going to be fights. You described to me a system of blue slips that operated when you first entered the Senate. It's a system that I gather is being driven to extinction, or is it extinct already? But it is extinct, I believe. This is a little complicated, but bear with me, everybody, because this is incredibly important. You know how Trump in one of the debates said, "I've had 300 judges, federal judges, right, for district and circuit courts, and then 3 the Supreme Court." And he said, shame on Obama for leaving so many seats open. Well, Obama didn't leave them open. It was the Republicans in the Senate who stopped him from confirming anyone because they would not turn in their blue slips. Now, this is what the blue slip is. If the president, say, nominates a judge for a circuit court that is your state's spot in that court, you had, until Trump, you had a blue slip, which means it was just the tradition of the Senate for over 100 years that if you withheld your blue slip, you would not allow that judge to be confirmed, and that was respected. Even though in Minnesota, even though in your case the 2 senators, you and maybe Klobuchar, were both Democrats, you would be extended that courtesy as senators. Absolutely, and on my judge on the 8th Circuit was Strauss, was a very, very, he clerked with Clarence Thomas, and he had been a member of, he had been on the Minnesota Supreme Court. He had been on the short list from the Federalist Society for the Supreme Court, the first one. I wasn't going to hand in my blue slip. And they basically, Grassley, and I think it was McConnell and McGahn, said, no, we're not going to honor the blue slip anymore. And again, this has been 100 years. And the reason so many vacancies were there were senators like Cruz and Cornyn and McConnell and others had just wouldn't turn in the blue slip. So all these vacancies were ready to be filled. And what this does is ruin the federal courts. Because it used to be, and what I was ready to do was when Don McGahn called me and said, I want Strauss, we're going to... McGahn, the White House counsel, Don McGahn. White House counsel, sorry. When he calls me up and says, I want to nominate Strauss, I said, no. I know. Oh, just, talk to him, read his stuff. Okay. And I did. Nice guy, the judge was. But I said, no, not handing in the blue slip, and then they took it away on this judge. And So what I wanted to do was say, I'll go back to Minnesota and we will get very well respected judges and lawyers in Minnesota to find a conservative Republican judge who is very well respected by everyone. And that's what had been happening on both sides, whether it was a Republican president or a Democratic president. That was the process. And because of that, the federal judiciary was respected, because the people who ended up in the federal judiciary were people who were selected like this. And by a consensus in the state, we're going to pick someone who should be on the circuit court or should be on the district court. That's how it was done. And then as soon as they did this, they started putting through really awful people. And I was on judiciary, and I was hearing people who the Bar Association had said were not qualified, people who had tweeted awful stuff. I mean, just totally rabid conservatives, people who were just would never have been on the court before. Now, if we get the majority, there's nothing to stop Biden from just saying, okay, I'm going to get the most liberal judges and put them on. But that's no way to create a federal judiciary that's respected.
Well, before we move on, which I have to in just a moment, would that be your advice? Would your advice be do unto others as they did unto you?
Oh, we're not going to restore the blue slip. That would be insane. They took advantage.
Yeah.
And also, this would be not the same situation. What they did was fill all these spots that had been vacated by their using the blue slip.
Yeah.
So no. That's just not going to happen.
All right. Well, perhaps we'll come back to this in the Q&A section, sure. and certainly to other matters.
But Al Franken and Norm will have thoughts on that.
Okay. Thanks a lot, and stick around for the Q&A, which will come up fairly soon. Our next panelist, who's a former colleague of mine and a longtime friend, and when I say long time, here's the measure of that. When I went to work at National Public Radio in 1976. Nina Totenberg was there covering the Supreme Court and many other things. When I retired in 2018, she was still at NPR covering the Supreme Court, as she still is, doing it as well as anybody ever has. She's made the court's work accessible to all of us, and she's broken some big stories along the way. I like to say that Nina's house, you can't see it from this view, is furnished with silver gavels, the prestigious awards that the American Bar Association gives for journalism. And over the years, she's reported on many things and used to be on the old TV roundtable show Inside Washington. Nina, it's great to see you, and thanks for being with us.
It's my pleasure, Robert.
When you think ahead to next year, and again, we don't know how Georgia is going to end up and how that might affect the Senate, do you anticipate some return to something familiar that we used to call normal, or a strange new politics in part driven by an ex-president who's rallying a movement to make himself a future president?
Well, I don't know that we'll ever return to normal. And I think some of the things that Al just talked about are an example of that. And so let's just say, for example, that some member of the Supreme Court were to retire in the next year or a year and a half, or even 2 years, but let's say the next year, and President Biden would have the chance to nominate a successor. There is a school of thought that says that Mitch McConnell, if he's still in control of the Senate, would not allow the confirmation of anybody. I don't know if that's true. He certainly did that to President Obama in the 10 months or so before the end of his term. And it was an unprecedented move back then. But I've stopped saying, oh, they wouldn't do that, referring to almost anybody. They wouldn't do that because they almost always would. And so I'm not predicting.
On your beat at the court, what are some big questions that you would be expecting to see answered between now and the end of June or early summer when the court recesses? What are big issues before the court?
Well, I think the court may try as much as possible to stay out of the political sphere for a while, that meaning maybe this term, but they may not. I mean, there are at least 5 members of the court now who would likely want to take a gun rights case, and that would invalidate a great deal of the legislation throughout the country that makes it difficult to buy, or more difficult for people to buy guns in particular states or even federal statutes. I mean, for example, we know that Justice Kavanaugh would have invalidated a statute passed in the District of Columbia that barred magazine clips of a certain size and certain kinds of guns, etc. And ultimately, his colleagues did not agree with him on the DC Circuit, but we know that that's his view, and now he's on the Supreme Court. And we know that Justice Barrett, when she was Judge Barrett, had a very broad view of gun rights and a very limited view of what you could do to regulate guns. So that's one area. There are affirmative action cases in higher education, once again making their way to the Supreme Court. And while those decisions saying that race can be a factor in college admission have been upheld fairly consistently, even up to just a few years ago. The court's composition is different now, and I would expect the outcome to be different now. Then there's all the questions of presidential powers. And it's going to be very interesting because the conservative court was pretty, by and large, deferential to President Trump, as long as he at least followed the rules for how he did things, how administrative law rules. And we're going to see if they're as deferential to the Biden administration, if the Biden administration wants to do things that seem to a majority of this court to be going too far. So, for example, there's a school of thought among some of the conservatives on the court that Congress simply can't delegate to federal agencies the kinds of powers that they currently have to set up rules for, let's say, environmental rules. Mm-hmm. And how much of that non-delegation doctrine, which is an awful name, it doesn't mean what it says anyway, how much of that they're going to limit. And, you can hardly pick an issue that is important to you, anybody in the audience, that will not be affected by a court that is now, by and large, 6-3 conservative. But much more than that, it is a brand of conservatism that we haven't seen probably since the 1930s.
The court that was blocking the New Deal is what you're describing.
That's correct. Until there was a switch in time, save 9. But this isn't a 5-4 court anymore. This is a 6-3 court in a lot of ways. And Chief Justice Roberts, who's been a definitely conservative vote, but not as conservative as the other 5, his vote doesn't really count anymore if they stick together.
I just have one other question for you before we turn to our third panelist, which is you're the working journalist here, and there's always some tension between reporters and the people they cover in government. You experienced that tension pretty intensely at least at one time. But we haven't had a president calling the press the enemy of the people until Donald Trump, and I'm just curious whether working as a reporter, I'm in retirement, I don't know what it's been like, but has it been different? Is there a different sense of what the media, how the media are regarded, what its mission is? How different has this been in the Trump years?
Well, it's different in lots of different ways. First of all, you see that a substantial portion of the population simply doesn't trust what the mainstream media says. Secondly, you see that the administration is often at war with not just journalism, but with facts. It just calls us liars. And says everything is fake news. If it's a fact that they don't like, they call it fake news. By the same token, we now say things we never would have said before. We don't say the president lied, but we come very close. If you read the front pages of the newspapers, we have finally been, I think, driven into a corner where we are required to say the president asserted without evidence, or the president again made baseless allegations, or things like that I never came out of my mouth before, and I never saw on the front page of the New York Times or the Washington Post before. And so the entire relationship is degraded in that way. And I don't have a solution. I don't want to compare Trump to Hitler, but the press was criticized for not sort of saying the truth about what Hitler was doing. And we were criticized after the 2016 election for not being tough enough on Trump. So now I think our experience is that when we are tough on Trump in terms of the facts that he's presenting or the lack of facts, we end up looking like we're screeching and playing into his narrative that we're liars. So it's very frustrating.
Yeah.
In fact, I will tell you one little anecdote that tells you everything. About 3 weeks ago, I think, I get the normal feed from the Biden pool. So the notes from reporters who are assigned to the pool that's following Biden, I just routinely look at it because I want to know what's going on. And I noticed that day that it said there was a quote, from the Biden staff, "The lid is on." I haven't seen a lid in 4 years. If you don't know what a lid is, means unless something happens dire, we don't expect any further news, and the president will not be speaking or making any news. But the Trump folks couldn't make that guarantee about their boss because he was tweeting all the time and making news and saying things so that had to be covered. So there was no such thing as a lid. I haven't seen a lid in 4 years.
Okay. Well, hang in there, Nina, because in about 10 minutes, we're going to take some questions. But first, we turn to our third panelist, Norman Ornstein, who is a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, where his policy area is politics and public opinion. You can see he's Dr. Norman Ornstein. He has a PhD in political science. And for years, Norm has been writing, often with his longtime co-author, Tom Mann, about how Washington works when it does and why it doesn't work when it doesn't. I have to say, Norm, that you and Tom wrote a book about congressional dysfunction that had one of my favorite titles of all times. "It's Even Worse Than It Looks," was the title of the book. And we're honored to have you as our third panelist. How you doing?
Thank you, Robert. I'm doing all right. I should note that we did a revision of that book, which I titled "It's Even Worse Than It Was." And when people have asked, what would the next one be? I've said, probably "Run for Your Lives." And we're getting close to that point now. Thank God we have a right to return.
Given is that a reference to the Rabin Medical Center? Given the
of course, we know we could get medical care, which is no sure thing here in this country.
Assuming the uncertainty of the Georgia Senate runoffs and are not knowing what the situation will be there, when you look into your therefore multiple setting crystal ball, looking at Washington in the coming year, what do you see? Do you see nothing happening, gridlock, rancor, any progress? Joe Biden's magical powers to compromise? What do you expect?
So, I think Al was right that the difference between being in the majority and being in the minority is just enormous. It's the power to set the agenda, decide not just what comes up, but what doesn't come up. And we know how Mitch McConnell will exercise that. It's the ability to expedite your nominees for the executive branch and for the courts. And we know right now that Senate Republicans have indicated that they are going to put all kinds of obstacles in the way of Joe Biden getting his team in place in an expedited way. It means what kinds of investigations you hold. And we know already that Ron Johnson, senator from Wisconsin, and other Republicans are talking about holding hearings on the stolen election, on Hunter Biden and Burisma, and the fact that I use that term loosely here, that the Obama administration conspired to get Russia engaged and destroy the Trump presidency and his election in 2016. If there's a Democratic majority, even 50-50, with the Vice President Kamala Harris presiding and casting the tie-breaking vote, they could bring up, for example, a reconciliation bill, this sort of arcane, what was once arcane budget process, where you can get an expedited up or down vote with a simple majority. Mm-hmm. And they could include reform of the healthcare system, including a public option, a really robust COVID recovery package, stimulus, infrastructure bill, and maybe even other things, tax reform, that will not come up at all if it's a McConnell majority leader's position. So that's, I think, a critical element. Without it, there's not much legislatively that Joe Biden is going to be able to accomplish, unless it's things that are a little bit below the radar, where there is broad support, maybe some criminal justice reform, I hope mental health reform, but it'll have to be executive action. And Nina pointed out that we may have a Supreme Court poised to put severe limits on what can be done there. One other thing I would mention, Robert, I'm just finishing a piece on this. We have the most slender House majority coming in since 1930. In 1930, in that election, the Republicans actually won 218 seats, making a majority. But between the time of the election and when Congress convened, which was March at that point, 14 Republicans died, and the Democrats won enough of the special election seats that they had a majority for that 2 years. Right now, the Democrats' majority is 4, and 2 will be leaving as of January 20th. So far, 2. Cedric Richmond moving to the White House from his seat in Louisiana. And we have Marcia Fudge from Ohio moving into the cabinet. And that leaves them with a majority of 2. First of all, if they don't all show up on January 3rd to get sworn in and they have to be there in person, we could see a majority change right there if some of them get COVID or can't make it. But if the Biden administration decided to pick any more of them for the cabinet or for other positions, or if anybody died, the whole majority could be in question. It's going to be an enormous challenge for Nancy Pelosi, just as in some ways it's a challenge for Mitch McConnell, where many of his colleagues have gone around without masks, have engaged in all kinds of meetings with large numbers. If 4 of them before January 6th come down with COVID or are quarantined, then for at least a brief period of time, we could have a majority leader, Chuck Schumer.
There's one challenge ahead for 2021 that it could be simply more administrative than legislative, and that's dealing with COVID-19. I think most Americans will be preoccupied with the issue of are the vaccines being distributed, who's getting them, and is the economy bouncing back as people are able to go back to work and stores are able to open again. Is it possible, do you think, that some confidence in government and some effectiveness from government could be impressive on that front, and that Joe Biden might luck into the rebound of the economy on that front?
It's certainly possible, and we're going to see, I think, an extraordinarily competent and effective team moving in with the Biden administration on this front. But, I hate to just throw cold water on every positive thing happening out there. When we wrote the book, It's Even Worse Than It Looks, A great Hanukkah gift, by the way, still.
And a stocking stuffer, we should say.
Yeah, or Kwanzaa, if anybody is listening, or Festivus, whatever it might be. I use the term tribalism. We have polarization, but our politics have become tribal. And what we know out there is that while 76% of Republicans right now believe the election was rigged and was stolen, a vast majority of Republicans also believe at this point that COVID is either a hoax or just some minor thing that we don't need to worry about, easier even to deal with than the flu. We even have cases in South Dakota where, because you have a governor joining with the president in downplaying COVID, not putting in any restrictions, the social distancing or masks, we have a higher death rate in South Dakota per capita than anywhere in the world. And I saw today, yet again, a nurse in an intensive care ward saying people who are dying continue to say to her, it's a hoax. So we have headwinds here that don't occur in many other countries that are going to make a real challenge for Joe Biden. When Joe Biden as president says, all of us need to wear masks for 100 days, we need to continue to social distance, we may need to shut things down a little bit further to get through this next wave, a large share of the country may either say no or say it's our freedom to engage in civil disobedience, or, as we've seen in Michigan and elsewhere, something that is far less than civil. So the challenges are very great, but if we can get through it with the vaccines, and I hope with rapid, cheap testing that people can do at home, or so they can go into restaurants where you can get the results within 20 minutes and have them be pretty accurate, and that may be on the way. We can get this economy moving later in 2021 and maybe be back on a very positive path. But it's going to be a rocky and turbulent road. That's the reality.
One more question before we turn to questions from the audience. Republicans in Washington have been very deferential to Donald Trump. It's often said, really out of the knowledge that he's more popular back home than they are. For example, people know who he is, which is more than what the Secretary of State of most states can say, or most members of Congress. Do you think that the former and perhaps would-be future President Donald Trump on the outside will command a similar deference, or do you expect that his influence will subside?
So, today we got a very disturbing report. A majority of the members of the House of Representatives have signed the amicus brief for this, I have to be blunt, bogus lawsuit brought by the Texas Attorney General, joined by 17 Republican attorneys general, challenging the election and basically saying it's a bogus election, trying to overturn the results of an election that Joe Biden won by every standard in a landslide. 7 million popular votes, 306 electoral votes, larger margins in battleground states than Donald Trump won in 2016. Donald Trump is, by every standard, a lame duck president. That you have a majority of members of the House and 17 attorneys general signing on to this now tells you that his role is going to be substantial. I doubt very much that he actually will run in 2024. He is using this opportunity as a great fundraising tool. He's already raised over $200 million for a leadership PAC that he can use to finance a lot of his own personal expenses in other ways. He will use it as a vehicle to get out there and try to influence the country and the public. He is still the leader of the Republican Party. It's Donald Trump's Republican Party, and that means pernicious impact looking ahead. He will move to do whatever he can to bring down Biden's presidency so it doesn't look as good as his own, and to delegitimize the government that's in power. That is a very difficult challenge that we will face as a country. Period.
Okay. Norm Ornstein.
Have a nice day, Robert.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Norm. Al Franken and Nina Totenberg. Let's bring everyone back because there's a question posed by Helene Grants, who asks, would someone please mention an issue that would unite our country? One issue.
I mean, actively unite people. I think there's some stuff we can agree on, infrastructure, that kind of thing. I think If I think, as Norm was talking, that, a success will help.
David Wasserman of the Cook Political Report has come up with this interesting little device of looking at counties that have only a Whole Foods compared to counties that have only a Cracker Barrel. And it turns out in this election that about 85% of the counties with only a Whole Foods voted for Democrats, and a comparable number with only a Cracker Barrel voted for Republicans. And that's a reflection of a divide. It's an educational divide, a cultural divide, a regional divide. But what unites, I think, in this case is a part of that infrastructure, which is universal high-speed broadband. We know it's lacking in rural areas. We know there are so many dead spaces in inner cities. And if you don't have access to high-speed broadband now, you can't get anywhere or compete in the world or shop or open up eBay stores or anything of that sort. And so we could get, I think, a united front to put in money to expand this in cities and in rural areas. And if we think along those lines, we may be able to get some action.
I think Dave Wasserman, by the way, likes the joke that somebody from the Whole Foods county says, "Oh, you mean Crate and Barrel, surely." It's the joke that we like to tell. This is Nina. Please evaluate what will happen to abortion rights given the current configuration of the Supreme Court.
Well, they will initially be diminished. And my guess is that ultimately the court will reverse Roe versus Wade. They have 6 votes. They have 5 anyway, I think. And you see that illustrated in the very strong push by actually all of the members of the conservative majority in terms of the doctrine of separation of church and state, which has all but gone away in favor of a doctrine that is very deferential to the exercise of the free exercise of religion. And so you're going to see a court that is already very deferential to religiosity, and you saw the Chief Justice get voted down on this when Governor Cuomo's limits on houses of worship in Brooklyn got struck down by the court. And you're going to see more of this kind of thing. And I think abortion is just part of it.
They're going to make it harder for women in Louisiana and Texas and states where state legislatures pass laws that just make it almost impossible to have a clinic, that you have to, the doctors that are there have to have admission rights at a hospital. I mean, there was a case the last term of the court, that was a Louisiana case that was exactly like a Texas case that Robert sided with the 4 liberals, but Nina's right there. That's gone. And so what I think you're going to see at first is exactly that, making it much harder for women to access that. And then eventually probably Roe v. Wade goes away.
And then it would be up to states, presumably, to pass legislation, which I can remember when that was happening before Roe v. Wade, when the New York State legislature legalized abortion a long time ago. A question from Leslie Gutterman in the audience. I guess, Norm, why don't you try this? What is the motivation of the attorney generals? I guess meaning this is the lawsuit, the action of all the attorney generals.
So
Attorneys general, excuse me. Yes.
I'll go out on a little bit of a limb here and say that Ken Paxton, who's the Texas Attorney General who brought this case, has long been under investigation, federal investigation for potential fraud, basically. I think this is a fairly clear angle for a pardon on his part. And we're going to see a whole lot of people doing things to try and get pardons. And we already know, one of the great memes on Twitter is Oprah, only this time she's saying, you get a pardon, and you get a pardon, and you get a pardon. And we'll see some of that. The other attorneys general, I think most people who are state attorneys general have statewide ambitions at other levels. And I think what we have here is a whole lot of people who want to run for governor. And it tells you a lot about today's Republican Party, that the way to solidify your position as a potential candidate for higher office as a Republican is to side with Donald Trump, no matter how bizarre, loony, or seditious the approach is.
But let's set aside looniness and sedition and just talk about whom Donald Trump is appealing to and whom he connected with on issues of immigration or of trade agreements that seem to make it very easy to go shop for cheap labor overseas. How much does it change the Republican Party to become the party of displaced blue-collar industrial workers, to become in effect, the working class party in America? It appears the Republican Party is in the midst of a transformation right now.
There's no question it's a transformation, and we're seeing some really, in some ways you'd say, weird changes in American politics, that the Democrats are becoming the party of the college educated and the wealthier group, except for the billionaires, and they have a few of those, while the Republicans are becoming the party of working class white voters. Democrats are still the party of working class people of color. But the question, I think, the struggle for the soul of the Republican Party, and it may already have been lost at least for a period of time, is whether it becomes a more radical populist party, which is the conditions of radical right-wing populism are racism, nativism, protectionism, isolationism, or whether it becomes a party with a softer touch of that populism. There's no sign of the latter at this point. I think the populism is going to be a significant part of it. And my guess is that among the candidates for the Republicans in 2024, you're going to have the Tom Cottons, whose pitch will be, and Josh Hawley's, whose pitch will be, I'm just like Donald Trump, only I'm smarter. I'm not going to make the mistakes that he made. And that will be a more dominant theme. Unless they lose big in 2022, in that midterm, if they do as well in 2022 as they did in the midterms in the Obama years, 2010, 2014, they're not going to change at all from the Trump bandwagon. If they lose big, then there's going to have to be a reckoning, and maybe some of the more traditional conservatives who are not in office at this point in most places will begin to have a little traction.
But I mean, can it be argued that in fact the success of Donald Trump reflected an accurate judgment by a lot of voters that the establishments of the political parties were running on fumes, that ideas that were part of a Washington consensus in the 1990s had hollowed out American manufacturing jobs in the 21st century, and that they were going to go for somebody who would put it to the establishment, Republican or Democrat. So that would mean it's up to Joe Biden right now to actually do something that would, be a response in action to that. That's a question for Democrats. So I'll ask you.
Trump tapped into that populist. Look, remember they did their autopsy in 2014, and their autopsy said, "Gee, there's a lot of people of color, Latinx people, Black. The composition of our country is changing, and we better do something to deal with that." And their choice was to try to suppress votes more. And so that.
But it was disproved, Al. It was the loss. Mitt Romney's loss led to that autopsy or postmortem for the party, yes. And that Reince Priebus, the RNC chair, led. And Donald Trump proceeded to win an election without any effective outreach to the very minority groups that.
That's what I'm saying. They kind of ignored. They didn't follow the autopsy. They did the exact opposite, and so they they were helped in the Supreme Court by Shelby County, and they just, and if you look at what happened down ballot this year, this election, it doesn't look good for 2 years from now and for 4 years from now.
Let me, in the little time that's left, first of all, acknowledge a complaint that there isn't a Republican present on the panel. That's true, but that doesn't mean that there are necessarily 3 Democrats, as Nina explained.
We have a Republican here.
All right, please.
He's a Republican. We needed a little levity.
I don't like that.
And white, of course.
But I also wanted to ask Al Franken, someone writes from New York, about cross the aisle relationships, friendships with senators. Is it for real? That is, when a Democrat, Barack Obama writes about his friendship with Tom Coburn in the U.S. Senate, it seems an unlikely couple. I mean, did you have dealings with the people who were politically very, very far from you that were actually productive and friendly?
Of course. Very odd. James Langford.
Mm-hmm.
We were very friendly. Mike Lee. It also helped when they had a sense of humor. And so that was but there were, of course, and there were some people on the Democratic side that I was not friendly with.
But does that mean that there's a basis for actual compromise, or is that something you check at the door? So we should take nothing optimistic.
That every once in a while you'd work with somebody on something that they were your friend and you found something. My first bill was to get service dogs to veterans with PTSD. And I did that with Johnny Isaacson. And Johnny Isaacson was a friend. Everybody was a friend of Johnny Isaacson.
From Georgia. Yeah,
very, very sweet. That's why we have a special election, because he left in midterm because of Parkinson's.
Well, it's I've gone over our allotted time, so I just want to thank the 3 of you for an enlightening conversation.
My Robert Siegel.
Yes.
Sorry.
Robert Siegel.
Okay.
I'm Robert Siegel. The word avuncular stems from the Latin root avunculus, meaning uncle-like. There we go.
I know. It's very hard for me to judge, but I know you're very proud of your Robert Siegel impression, and it's.
Thank you.
Well, everybody does a Robert Siegel impression.
I didn't realize that.
Norm.
All right.
We're on Jewish time anyhow, so if we didn't go over, it would be a Shonda.
It would be a Shonda. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you to.
Yeah. Why didn't they ask, instead of why no Republicans, why no Gentiles?
You want to point to the dog
real
again
question.
and get us out of this trouble?
Well, it's Hanukkah. That's why.
It is. Norm, Al Franken, Nina Totenberg, and Norm Ornstein. Thanks to all 3 of you for taking part in this discussion.
Robert, the Walter Cronkite of Jewish broadcasting.
And thanks to today's program sponsor, JLL Tri-State, and many thanks to Joshua Ploud, Nate Bonzani, and Roni Giuliano from American Friends of Rabin Medical Center, and our video and Zoom director, Bobby Grandone. Our program sponsor every month is the American Friends of Rabin Medical Center, a 501c3 national charitable organization that represents in the U.S. Israel's largest hospital in Petach Tikva in Greater Tel Aviv. The website for the medical center is www.afrmc.org. I'm Robert Siegel, and this has been Global Connections, Navigating the New Abnormal. See you next month. Stay healthy and stay safe.
pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.